There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello Booktube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with, I think, my first tag video since I moved from Tokyo to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada at the end of May. I've been a little busy, or whatever. The number one tag on my list of tags, and I've got a fairly long list of tags to catch up on, but the number one was this one, the Stand with Trans Kids book tag, originated by a booktuber who is very near and dear to my heart, Leo Bancroft. And he originated this months ago. I was tagged originally by him. I was also tagged, I believe, by Brian of Bookish and also Kim of Middle of the Book March. Two other people tagged me. I've been multiply tagged, and I'm finally ready. I finally kind of cleared my head to do a tag. I've actually been making notes on this for some weeks. In a way, I'm kind of glad that I've taken my sweet time to do it, because I'm hoping that me doing this tag, and I'm going to tag a whole swack of fairly new, at least new to me, booktubers, to hopefully give this tag a second run around BookTube. And I also hope that it will send a subliminal message to Leo that he needs to come back on BookTube a little more regularly, because I miss his videos. He's a really dear person with his, what is it, calisthenics? He's just got a whole bunch of talents. Isn't he an ordained minister and trapeze artist and goodness knows what else? If you don't know his channel, please go check it out. Of course, it will be linked in the show notes. Prompt number 1. Tag some fabulous friends who may also want to do this tag and stand with trans kids. So I have a whole bunch. A lot of people have done it, so I've been quite careful in terms of both the books I'm going to talk about later and who I'm going to tag now, that I'm not duplicating, but apologies if I have missed anything. The first person I want to tag is a wonderful gender non-binary booktuber. They have been on my channel, on my bite-sized book chats, at least twice, maybe 3 times. And that is Nyambura of the BookTube channel and podcast and newsletter and Twitter. 100 on Books is their channel, etc. And I don't believe they have done this tag, so I can't wait to find out some good recommendations from Nyambura about African trans non-binary stuff. Heidi of My Reading Life, I don't think has done this tag. Kendra Winchester, I don't think has done this tag. And boy, will she have things to share. Neither has Heather of Soggy Expat Book Nerd, nor Kim of Native Lady Book Warrior. And I bet there's a whole bunch of great Indigenous stuff that she knows all about and will let us in on. Duncan McCurdy and Quinton from the somewhat new channel Idjit Reads and Rambles. And then here are the rest of them are a list of booktubers who have been commenting on some of my recent videos, and I am just barely getting acquainted with their channels. Becca of Read Becca, Angelia of Read and Reread, Alex of Stay at Home Reader, Anne Novella, Erica of The Broken Spine, and Katja Weiner. Those last two, I don't think they're that new channels, but they're kind of new to me. So those people I tag, and if you're watching this video and you have not done this fabulous tag, consider yourself tagged by moi. Prompt number 2. Tell us about some books on your TBR pile featuring a trans non-binary character or non-fiction about trans non-binary stuff. There are a few of the prompts at the bottom, at the end of this tag, that I don't have an answer for, so I'm going a little bit crazy in some of my answers in these early ones because I have lots to say. So here are some that are on my TBR pile, and I have done a fair amount of research to see which of these books other booktubers have talked about, but I only reviewed the list of the ones that booktubers that I really know quite well. So I'm not going to talk too long about this one, but I'm going to hold it up. A Dream of a Woman by Casey Plett, a Manitoban trans writer, and I read her novel Little Fish earlier this year. Absolutely loved it. Dear Lindy gifted me this copy of Casey Plett's very recent short story collection. I can't wait to get to it. Another short story collection. This is A Natural History of Transition by Callum Angus. I don't know anything about Callum Angus. I'm on his website right now, and he has worked as a fishmonger, a barista, a reporter in Idaho, and the Trans Youth Equality Foundation. So, an American-based trans writer, collection of short stories. I would like to check it out. Here is a book that was on my TBR, my very ambitious TBR for the Queer Readathon in June. I didn't get to it, but I sure want to. Personal Attention Roleplay, stories by Helen Chau Bradley. Just to let you know, not all the books I'm going to be talking about in this video are short story collections, but so far, Helen Chau Bradley is a writer, musician, and former bookseller living in Montreal. They have written poetry as well. This is their first book of fiction, short or otherwise, and I was intrigued enough by the title to buy the book when I was still living in Tokyo. Can't wait to get to it. I'm not going to talk at any length about this. I have never read Vivek Shraya. Vivek Shraya is one of Lindy's favorite writers. Lindy talked about I'm Afraid of Men, and I believe, I can't remember if it was Greg of Supposedly Fun or Brian of Books, maybe both also mentioned Vivek Shraya or that book. I must get to something written by Vivek Shraya one of these days. It's ridiculous that I haven't. Imogen Binny is a trans writer, and her debut novel is Nevada, which came out in 2013. I've heard really good things about it. I want to try it. The non-binary trans writer Chang Tom is someone who I think was put on my radar by Lindy. Certainly I know Lindy is a fan, and she is a Canadian writer and a former social worker. 4 books including Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars. The subtitle is A Dangerous Trans Girl's Confabulous Memoir, and it is identified in the Wikipedia entry as being a novel, so that's a bit of a gender-bending description. Here's one that I don't think anybody's talked about. It is an Argentinian novel. The author is Camila Sosa Villada. The novel is The Queens of Sarmiento Park. Actually, I think Greg has talked about this. I don't know if he did or talked about this in his version of this tag, but I think this came onto my radar from Greg. I'm not sure. So, the author, Camila Sosa Villada. The translator, Maude. And it is about the queerest boarding house in the world and set in Argentina. It's got a 4.46 rating on Goodreads. I can't wait to get to it. After a rave review by Lindy, and if I can find it, I'll link it in the show notes. I really want to read, even though I typically don't read poetry, Lindy's slowly working her magic on me. And so this is what I want to try. Very recently, Lindy reviewed the poetry collection Why I Was Late by Charlie Petch, and yeah, I was infused. I need to make an outtake video. I was hooked by what she said. So, Charlie Petch is a trans masculine writer. Don't remember now, but possibly a Canadian-based trans masculine writer. But Lindy will correct me in the comments, and I will try to find the Friday Reads or whatever it was where Lindy talked about Charlie Petch. This one I just picked up recently here in Saskatoon. Amateur, A Reckoning with Gender, Identity, and Masculinity by Thomas Page McBee. I heard about this book when it first came out, but I heard a rave review, and I can't remember if it was Nell or Scott or both of them on the fabulous channel Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. But Thomas Page McBee, a transgender man, was the first transgender boxer to box in Madison Square Garden, and this is his memoir. So those are the books on my TBR. I've probably got more books than that on my TBR, but that's enough, right? Prompt number 3, recommend a favorite book, show, or movie featuring a trans and or non-binary character. And I don't watch TV or movies, I have nothing, but I have a few books that I have read and loved. Number 1, and this is one about which Leo and I disagree. He wasn't quite so taken with this. This is one of the best books I've ever read, not only about the trans experience, but just about life and relationships. Torrey Peters' Detransition Baby. I have a full review. Lots of people have talked about it. I worship this book. I can't wait for Torrey Peters to write something else. I will put a link to my full review in the show notes. Also, Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi, and I am not going to misgender Akwaeke Emezi. When I first read this novel, in Akwaeke Emezi's Twitter bio, they listed both she, her, and they, them as pronouns that they would answer to. And about 6 months after I read and reviewed this novel on my channel, it was my top read of whatever year it came out, 2016, they shortened that list. And I have screwed up many times since, most of which I've been able to remove by editing, but I'm not going to make that mistake tonight. This is just a wonderful novel. I've read it twice, actually, and it is set in Nigeria. I believe it's quite autobiographical about Akwaeke Emezi's kind of family of origin story, and I'm not going to say any more about it, even though I don't think anybody else has talked about it in their tag, but I recommend it with all my heart. And I'll put a link to my review, which was filmed before they, them were the only pronouns that Akwaeke Emezi deemed acceptable. But yeah, I love this novel. Oh, this was such an incredible novel. This was put on my radar by Eric Carl Anderson. Anosh Irani, an Indo-Canadian writer's novel, The Parcel. This novel just blew me out of the water. I hate the fact that those stickers are right on the cover, like you can't peel them off. It's printed on the cover. It's so disgusting. Otherwise, what a fabulous novel. It is about a hijra prostitute in India, in the Indian subcontinent. Hijra is a term that is used to describe eunuchs, intersex people, transgender people. The protagonist of The Parcel is a hijra prostitute, and her life was horrific, and she works in a brothel that receives a steady supply of basically kidnapped young people, sold by their families because otherwise the families will starve to death. And she is basically superannuating out of the working life of a brothel, but she is kept on to train the incoming preteen or teenaged prostitutes, either intersexed or trans or male or female. And she views her work as spiritual because she knows that in the hands of any other trainer, that training and that breaking of their spirit would be so much more brutal. If you're the kind of a reader that likes to be kept awake at night by the ethical implications of what you're reading in a novel, oh my God, this is for you. I loved it. This was fabulous. A Canadian YA novella, The Fabulous Zed Watson, by Basil Sylvester and their father, Kevin Sylvester. Basil Sylvester is a non-binary young writer in Toronto, Canada, and their father, Kevin Sylvester, is a somewhat well-known, he wasn't well-known to me, but a well-known Canadian YA writer as well as broadcaster and this and that. And together, they wrote this novel that has a non-binary protagonist, and it's quite Harry Potter-esque with a mystery. It wasn't actually the kind of a story that I love, but I was so delighted to read it. I heard them interviewed on Sheila Rogers, whatever her book, podcast, and radio show is. I'll put a link to that interview, and I recommend it very highly. Earlier this year, I read this incredible novel from the Middle East about an intersex character, Without by Yunus Al-Khazami, translated by Michelle Hartman and Khalid Nasrallah, and I have a full review of it. The protagonist is a Yemeni intersex character who was raised female but has always felt male, set in a part of the world that you don't expect this kind of a story to come from. Yunus Al-Khazami has done a masterful job of telling such a sensitive story, and I have a full review on my channel. I will put a link in the show notes. So those are the books that I have read that I would very passionately recommend to you. Prompt number 4. Everyone has their own journey, and no one demographic is a monolith. Recommend a book with a journey, however you define that. I have 2. One is a book that I am in the middle of reading. I have to finish it over the weekend, and that's going to be a delight because I'm very much enjoying it. The debut novel, as far as I know, by the Latino-American writer Hernan Diaz, In the Distance, and it is very much a literal journey, but also a psychological, spiritual, cultural journey for the protagonist in the 19th century who starts out as a young Swedish boy. His poverty-stricken parents scrape together enough money to get him and his brother on a ship for America so they can have a better life than their hardscrabble existence in Sweden. And he gets separated from his brother just before they are to get on the ship. So he gets to America alone, and then what a journey. Oh, it's so tough and so vividly described. There are horse intestines and murderous madams at brothels and all number of adventures that befall our protagonist, and I'm finding it quite an absorbing read. So that's one. The other one I read about almost 2 years ago, A Long Way from Douala, by the queer Cameroonian Swiss writer Max Lobe. And this is about a journey that the protagonist takes with his best friend who he has the hots for. He's not an out gay man, but he's a closeted gay man in Cameroon. And his, I can't remember if it's his older brother or younger brother, but all I need to do is check on the back, because there's a mistake on the back. So they refer to the brother who disappears as the eldest son, but that's not true. It's the younger son. So our protagonist and his best friend, who he's got the hots for, goes off across Cameroon to try and basically capture or catch his younger brother, who's trying to escape to the West to fulfill his dream of being a professional soccer player. And it's a road novel unlike anything that you could ever imagine. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I have a full review of this. Number 5, none of us knows everything, even about our own identities, especially since we're not a monolith and each have our own journey. What is a book that taught you something either about yourself or the world around you? Again, I'm going to go on at some length because there's a few questions at the end that I have no answer for. One of the books that taught me a lot about the context in which I grew up, my situatedness as a Western Canadian growing up in Saskatchewan, Canada, and that is this work of history, Clearing the Plains, Disease, Politics of Starvation, and the Loss of Aboriginal Life. Have I got that right? Yes, by James Dashik. I did this as a buddy read with Jay Shea, and this changed my life. This book, it's not the easiest book to read. It's a little bit clunky, the prose, but oh my god, the information in here opened my eyes to the murderous, genocidal backdrop to the life that I have led as the son of a farmer and multiple generations of farmers who homesteaded on the prairies, and what happened on the plains, not only in Canada, not only in Western Canada, but in the States as well, obviously, to make all of that lifestyle possible. This is incredible. I have a full review on my channel. I will link it in the show notes. Another book that was really influential in my young adulthood as a gay man is the book The Culture of Desire. Subtitle is Paradox and Perversity in Gay Lives Today. It was published in the mid to late 90s. The author is Frank Browning. I have no idea if it would speak to anybody not of my generation, but it spoke deeply to me. A more recent read, and I don't think I have the book yet, it's still coming in a box from Tokyo, a collection of autobiographical essays, Dear Friend, From My Life I Write to You and Your Life by Yian Li, Chinese-American author. And this book got to me on such a deep level that I haven't been able to watch my hot take / review video that I put on BookTube 3 or 4 years ago when I first read it. So I'll link that below. I have not ever been able to watch it again, but it's a book that I've thought about almost every day since I read it all those years ago. It talks about reading and writing as a way of saving your own life. And it is anything but cliched, because that sounds cliched, and this book, the stuff that she tackles in this book are not the slightest bit cliched. I tend to get tongue-tied by the books that affect me the most deeply, and the next one is very recent. I just finished reading it last week, and it affected me in a similar way to that collection, Dear Friend, and that is the novel by a Los Angeles-based American writer, her debut, called Indelicacy, and the author's name is Amina Kane. I'm not going to talk about it at all. This video is going long. I'll put a link with a timestamp of my comments from last week's Saturday reads. All right, the rest of these prompts I'm going to go through quite quickly. Number 6, when things are hard in the world or in our lives, sometimes there are things we can do to help center and refocus ourselves, to bring joy, to keep us going, to keep living, resisting, being our authentically amazing selves. What are things you do to center yourself or find joy? So there's only one thing that just occurred to me now as I read it out loud that I will mention is, for decades, I kept a diary/journal, and I stopped quite soon after I met Kenji. I'm not sure why. It would be a good thing to pick up again, but I have boxes of my journals, and it was a really centering thing that I did in my life from the time I was preteen into, I was into my late 40s or whatever. So maybe someday I'll pick it back up. Otherwise, I got nothing. I read books, and there is nothing more centering, especially in a busy day. If I can find 20 minutes, I read several hours each day on an ideal day. But if I can start a busy day by reading at least 20 minutes, it just changes, it just grounds me. Number 7, what's your walk-on music or your feel at home in your body music? And I got nothing for this. I listen to classical music because it's the only music I can listen to these days and read at the same time, and otherwise music doesn't have a whole lot of meaning to me. I've gone through phases of loving world music, and in a way I still do love world music, but I don't sit around and listen to music without doing something else. And what I'm usually doing is reading, and in the last few years, as my concentration has deepened or my brain cells have started disappearing, it's only classical piano music. It can't be cello, it can't be anything else. It has to be piano music, classical piano music. It helps me to focus. Anything else, and I love jazz, don't like much of the newfangled music, anything from about 1960 onwards, no thank you. No, I'm not much of a music lover. It's always in the backdrop for me. 8 is about mentors. I won't read the whole quote. I don't relate to the idea of a mentor. I never have. I guess my parents have been mentors to me, but I don't. Anybody that I guess it's because aside from family, aside from my parents, anybody in my life who I've ever thought might be a mentor has always deeply disappointed me. So no, I don't really relate to mentors. Number 9, who are some out trans and or non-binary booktubers, Instagrammers, authors, actors that you would like to shout out? So I would like to shout out 2 that are in the bookish social media world. One is a booktuber, and I've already mentioned them, and that's Nyambura of 100 on Books. I have tagged them. I hope they do the tag, and they are exquisite. The other one is Joseph Schreiber, and Joseph's blog is Rough Ghosts. I have had Joseph on my bite-sized book chats twice, and whether it's on the page or on my bite-sized book chats, he's an incredibly articulate reviewer of translated fiction and kind of off the beaten track literary fiction. And it wasn't until after I had him on my bite-sized book chats twice that I noticed that he has a pinned tweet with a kind of memoir type essay that he wrote for a website or a journal called Minor Literatures about his transgender experience. I will link to that in the show notes as well. It's an incredibly powerful read. So those 2 in particular. Number 10, what are some organizations you'd like to shout out for supporting trans kids and or trans folks in general? There's 2 in Saskatoon I would like to shout out. I don't know these organizations personally. One is Trans Sask Support Services. I will put the link. And this is a Saskatoon-based trans support organization. I have been on their website just today, and they don't seem to have anything specifically targeted at trans youth, but they do have support groups that are open to trans folk of all ages. Similarly, Out Saskatoon, which has been for the last 20, maybe 25, 30 years, the Gay Community Center in Saskatoon, the Queer Community Center in Saskatoon, and they have a support group or a peer group for trans folks of all ages. I'll put a link to both of those. Well, I'm so glad I finally got to this. And What I didn't say at the beginning is that, and it's a bit of a blanket statement, but basically, I think a lot of queer people will agree with me that, gay men, we're pretty much okay in terms of our position in society. Certainly we're in a much safer place than we were decades ago, and the same for lesbians. But trans people are so vulnerable, and trans politics has become so contested in recent years, especially in the States, but not only in the States. And that's why I'm so glad Leo started this tag and that it's spreading all over BookTube, and I hope that the people that I have tagged will spread it even further, because we really need to stand behind trans folks, especially trans kids. Thanks for watching.